I am really happy to be here, Selene. Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Elizabeth Candelario, and I am on the advisory board of At The Epicenter. Last week, I had the distinct pleasure of guest hosting an episode of Regenerative Voices, Elevating Stories, Activating Change with Hunter Lovins. And I bet those that are tuning in today probably know Hunter. But whether you do or you don't, I'm sure we are all in for a treat today in this conversation. Hunter, although she is the woman who needs no introduction, I'm going to introduce her anyway. She is the president of Natural Capitalism Solutions. She is a professor of sustainable management at Bard College. She is chief of impact at Change Finance. She's been recognized as Time Magazine's Millennium Hero for the Planet, and Newsweek has called her a green business icon. So I have to really agree with that. Hunter has spoken at the World Economic Forum. She's spoken to the US Congress. She's spoken at the UN. She does have an extremely diverse client list that includes many Fortune 500 companies and a lot of countries around the world. She's written literally hundreds of papers and 15 books, including her most recent work, A Finer Future, Creating an Economy in Service to Life. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I really highly recommend it. It's available on Amazon, including this e-book version, but it's also, of course, recommended that you buy it at your local bookstore. So welcome, Hunter.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It is such a thrill to be here with y'all.
And I want to also welcome everybody else that's listening today. While I was lucky enough to ask the questions during the last podcast, in today's Q&A, you all are going to get to ask her questions as well. So here's what we're going to do. I have a couple more things that I'd like to ask Hunter myself to get things started, and then we'll open the floor for everyone. If you have a question, I think the best way to manage this is just to type it into the chat box, and then I will call on you so you can ask Hunter the question yourself. You guys are all automatically muted, but when you hear me ask your name, just go ahead and unmute yourself. And if you can try to remember to put your mute back on when you're done, that would be fantastic. So let's get started. But before I turn it over to all of you, Hunter, there are a couple things that came up during our last conversation that I really wanted to revisit. During our talk, we covered lots of ground. And for those of you who didn't listen to the podcast, I'm hoping that today's conversation will really encourage you to do so, because I thought it was really, really awesome. We talked a lot about the core tenet of Hunter's work, which is that sustainability can be coupled to profitability. We talked about the concept of natural capitalism and how we are really liquidating natural and human capital in order to produce more manufactured goods and financial capital. We talked about how our whole financial system was in essence designed backwards, that we, the people and the planet, are really in service to the economy instead of designing an economy to be in service to our values, to what is really important to us in this very human experience. We also talked a lot about inequality, how it certainly is a common theme in a lot of your work over the years, and certainly strongly emphasized in A Finer Future. So Hunter, that got me thinking about something you mentioned very early in our conversation, which was almost offhanded. You shared that your mother worked in the coal fields of West Virginia organizing mine workers, and that your father mentored Cesar Chavez and Martin Luther King. Hey, that's amazing. Growing up in a household like that, well, I suspect that could be a book in and of itself. And here you are, you know, today, decades later, in the midst of this incredible international pandemic that is exposing so many fault lines, including this tremendous inequity that is systematically baked into so many aspects of our cultural, financial, and civic life. So I'd like to ask you, connect those dots for us. How does growing up in a household like that influence your thoughts about what's happening now and where you would like to see us go from here?
People ask me what was the moment? When did you decide that working for a better world was how you wanted to spend your life? And my answer is there wasn't a moment. It's just what you did. Growing up, those were the people who were around me. And I mean, I remember the day my mother came home and said, "We're not eating grapes." Like, why not? I like grapes. Well, Cesar's boycotting them. Oh, to this day, I have a hard time buying a grape, even though Cesar won the boycott and organized a lot of the farm workers and said to everybody, go back and buy grapes. It's our people who are picking them. But in a larger sense, none of us have won that battle. We still are in a world that is based on systematic racism, systematic inequality. It's baked into the system. So it is the work of all of us every day to look at how we think, how we do business, our common practices, and ask ourselves, to what extent am I contributing to this problem, and what can I do to be part of the solution? And these aren't easy answers, because when things are baked into a system, it's really challenging to turn them around. So Eben Goodstein, who runs the Bard MBA program at which I teach, called up the other day and said, I'm writing a white paper. Oh, I can't call it a white paper anymore. And master bedroom in a house, the concept of master and servant. These things are just so part of our vernacular that we tend not to think about them. And yet it is imperative on all of us to dig deep inside ourselves and start rooting this stuff out, identifying it when we can see it, challenging it, engaging with it, and kindly to ourselves, because these things are, some of them are very deep held perceptions of white superiority and of people who are less than ourselves. And that's the root of a lot of these problems. A friend of mine, Elizabeth Dodson Gray, wrote a book years ago, Why the Green Nigger?, saying that our attitudes towards race impact our attitude toward the environment, and that we see the environment in the same way in which we have treated people of color. We see women that way. And that these perceptions are just so intertwined in everything about how we've grown up. So they're hard to root out. And yet I think it's incumbent on each one of us to engage with this struggle on a daily basis. And I remember Cesar so kindly. He was such a gentleman, such a wonderful man. And I met him shortly before he died, went up to him and said, I'm Paul Sheldon's daughter. He said, I remember you.
Incredible memories. Speaking of women, and I don't know how many of you, I bet a lot of you have been watching the Democratic National Convention, and just to see all that incredible female leadership that is standing up and speaking out, along with people of color, and just the whole beautiful quilt that's seemingly making up America, that has been so in front of us the last couple of days, and frankly, extremely refreshing. But I have another question for you, and this is a really good one. So another thing that you mentioned was in the context of female leadership that we are witnessing through COVID. And that it seems to be the case that countries with women at the helm are faring much better. So you think about Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, Angela Merkel, one of my favorite people in Germany, Sanna Marin in Finland, Tsai Ing-wen, the president of Taiwan. You said, and I'm going to quote you here, the countries that have the best results dealing with COVID all turn out to be run by women. I don't know if this is positive, but it is a hell of a close correlation, unquote. You also mentioned that you were part of a team looking into this. So go ahead, Hunter. I want to hear the whole story.
This was brought up by some colleagues of mine who are part of a group called the Bus Family. We call ourselves the Bus Family because we all rode around Nepal, or no, not Nepal, Bhutan on a bus at the invitation of the king, who asked a group of us to come and try to help Bhutan take its concept of gross national happiness and embed it into the approach to global development. That little effort failed for political reasons. Bhutan's then visionary prime minister lost his election next time round because he had been in conversations with China as well as with India. India didn't like that, and 2 weeks before the election, they pulled the subsidies for cooking oil, which doubled the price, and they said to the Bhutanese people, if you vote for this guy, we will call the debt and thereby crash the Bhutanese economy. And quite unexpectedly, the visionary prime minister lost to a Western educated economist that India preferred. So our little effort died. We said, well, it was a good effort. We ought to start talking about the concept of well-being as what we ought to be measuring on the international scale as opposed to GDP. This was led by Dr. Robert Costanza, Dr. Jacqueline McGlade, who for many years was the chief scientist at the UN Environment Program. Bob is Crawford Chair at Australia National University and one of the fathers of ecological economics. So we pulled this little group together and started doing some writing. In fact, in many ways, A Finer Future grew out of that effort. The king at one point said to me, Hunter, your job is to reinvent the global economy. I said, me? So started asking everybody that I could find who's smarter than me, how would you do that? And that tracked me into John Fullerton. And so I pulled John and Stuart Wallace, who for many years ran New Economics Foundation, and Anders Wigman, who ran climate policy for the Swedish government, was a European parliamentarian, to help write a book about, okay, how would you reinvent the global economy? But the Bus Family has continued to meet, and at the, I guess it was April or so, started to notice that the countries that were doing the best in flattening the curve of exponential growth of the spread of COVID were run by women. And so we pulled together at the behest of a guy named Lorenzo Fioramonti, who is, depending on which government is in Italy, in or out of the government, and drafted a paper. And if I can pull up my WhatsApp, I guess, I can find the URL for that, posted in the chat box. But interestingly, there was just a piece this last week in The Guardian, female-led countries handled coronavirus better, study suggests. This was not done by us. So other people are learning this as well. And here is the Guardian piece, and then I will try to go back and find the URL for the article that we wrote. I think the Guardian's article is actually a little better than the one that we wrote. But, and again, there's always a debate between, is something causative or is it a correlation and something else is actually causing it? But we're pretty clear now that the difference in leadership style, the, if you will, humility to listen to experts, is really important in dealing with a novel collapse like COVID, and is probably a better leadership style going forward than what we are witnessing, particularly by the fascist governments, Bolsonaro the government in Hungary, the government in Washington, and we might want to think about putting more women into positions of power. So go Kamala.
Excellent. Annie Beal has a really good question about the word capitalism. Annie, can you step up here and go ahead and ask?
Thanks. I'm dealing with learning about the word capitalism and how to apply it. And I'd love to hear how using that word may propel or prevent any new visions and functions that you're calling for.
I'm a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. I believe what we are witnessing now on the world stage is what Randy Hayes called cheater capitalism, what my friends at the little company Undercurrent call crapitalism. It is a perversion of capitalism. Capitalism ought to be the management and stewardship of all forms of capital to create greater well-being and authentic wealth, which can be material wealth, but goes far beyond that. Capital, as currently managed, and Elizabeth referred to this in the beginning, is seen only as money and stuff. So we are destroying intact cultures, we're destroying intact ecosystems to generate more money and stuff. Oh, and by the way, in doing that, we are injuring ourselves. The pandemic almost certainly came from incursions into wild ecosystems to capture wild animals to sell into the food trade. And this has been the source of pandemics in the past and will be the source of pandemics in the future if we don't begin to realize that we have to accord to intact ecosystems their own dignity, just as we have to accord to all people their own dignity. And as we begin to do this, we will evolve to what I think is a more authentic form of capitalism. We called it natural capitalism, but of course it also includes human capitalism, the enhancement of all forms of human capital. And if you start counting forms of capital, there are, of course, the four conventional ones of manufactured, financial, natural, and human. But you break down particularly human and natural. Natural capital can be exploitable sources of material that you can mine or cut or dig up. It can also be the intact ecosystems. Similarly, human capital is not just an exploitable workforce, but intact ecosystems, the intact community, institutional capital, cultural capital, spiritual capital, legal capital. And it's now clear that unless you have all of these forms of capital in a community, you're not in a position, for example, to do successful economic development. Just seeing human capital as workers puts you in a uncompetitive position. I've done a lot of work in places like Afghanistan, Honduras, Botswana, developing countries where without the rule of law, you can't do business. So even from a pure what's best for business standpoint, there is a very real business case for behaving responsibly to people and to planet. This is an approach we call the integrated bottom line, where the triple bottom line expects businesses to keep 3 sets of books. They're not gonna. But if I can show you that baking into your operations better care for people, the environment, is better for generating your profits, now it's just how you do business. It's better business. And it happens. Does that make sense?
Annie, do you have a follow-up question to that, or are you good?
Well, I don't think so. I think, yeah, you're unpacking those different forms of capital within capitalism and moving forward with those terms. Is there any other new terms that you're using?
Regenerative capitalism, John Fullerton's concept. And John has laid out these 8 principles of what a regenerative system is. And John and I argue it's what good colleagues and good friends do. But when I first read his paper, in fact, he was one of the first people that I went to after coming back from Bhutan. And he gave me the paper. He said it's not very good. He had released it at a conference of people working on new economics, and they had all dissed it, said, Matt, there's nothing new here. So John gave it to me, said, I guess it's not a very good paper. I read it en route to Germany and wrote him from 39,000 feet, said, John, wow, in 40 odd years of doing this work, this is the best I've ever found. We can quibble about this or that, but this really is what I've been looking for. So John and I have been working together ever since. And this concept of regenerativeness, now, of course, it is the word du jour. Everybody's talking about regenerative. And conflating it with sustainable, John says sustainability is an outcome of a regenerative system. That for something to be sustainable means it can go on indefinitely. That state of being results from systems that are regenerative of all forms of capital. And I was pleased to see he used the word capitalism as well. John asks, do I have any lines into the Biden campaign? Not yet. Of course, I'll be trying to find some. Biden was not my choice. I prefer Tom Steyer, who is a regenerative rancher, gets these concepts, has been working for years, putting his own personal wealth into trying to fight inequality and structural racism. But
Hunter,
it is. Go ahead, John.
To follow up on that, I mean, Steyer is inside that system. And if you talk to Tom about how you would translate what you're doing in a way that the Biden campaign could make use of?
I haven't. I've actually been trying to get a hold of Tom. He's a little busy these days. Tom is doing, working for Biden and other things, is doing in California what we're doing here in Colorado on behalf of Jared Polis, of trying to craft what would a regenerative recovery look like in Colorado. This is work pulled together by the Alliance Center. And we're literally right now in the process of writing the final report on that. It'll be a fun compilation of things. And I'm going to send what we do to Tom, because he's doing it in California. And of course, that's what Mr. Biden is, inshallah, going to get to do for the country as a whole.
May it be so.
May it be so.
Amen. Katya Hantel asked a question early on that I missed. I'm so sorry. And it's a great question about sustainability and profitability. Katya?
Thanks. I work in corporate sustainability, and I've seen over the past few decades a change in the way that corporations value this. And I'm just curious, Hunter, you mentioned you've been doing this for 40 years. How close are we to your vision? Give me a thermometer read. What percentage are we of the way there?
10 maybe? Maybe 20. You know, I stand on the shoulders of giants. My old boss, David Brower, my dear friend, Dana Meadows, Ray Anderson. They died when this looked like an almost impossible slog. And there are people now, excuse me, don't do this, but you can Google near-term human extinction, and find what purports to be science saying humans go extinct within 10 years. I was listening to a podcast yesterday with Dennis Meadows, another one of the authors of that old book, Limits to Growth. And Dennis was saying it's too late. And myself, I think that's profoundly irresponsible. But these great leaders died before they saw even the inklings that we're turning it around. I put the year as 2014, when renewable energy began its triumph. And it is now abundantly clear everywhere. Renewables are now cheaper everywhere in the world than fossil energy. They are starting to sweep. My friend Tony Seba says by 2030, the world inevitably, for fundamental economic reasons, will be 100% renewably powered. If you do that, you solve half the climate crisis at a profit. If you add in regenerative agriculture, you solve the other half at a profit. And just in the last year, we have seen the rise of prominence of people like Gabe Brown, Will Harris, the regenerative agriculture people, Savory Institute's run off its feet answering people who want to get into this field. There is so much going on right now. I am seeing the change and I'm still alive. And we're going to win. I may not be alive to see the win, but children now in school will see it. We will have a regenerative world. And it's up to all of us to shape how it comes about. This election is critically important. Now, I'm not a big fan of Hillary, but she was right. We've got to win this one.
Yeah. I appreciate your sense of optimism. And hey, let's look at it this way. Who would have thought, if somebody told us in November of last year that everybody in the world was going to alter their behavior profoundly, and everything else that came out, we would have said there's no way. So in that is one of the, to me, the silver linings of this dark cloud that we're living under with COVID right now. And hopefully we can really continue the momentum in those areas where human behavior actually would work quite well for climate in strategies that we have going forward. I wanted to ask Tay. Yeah, Tay, you have a question. You go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been reading Regenerative Capitalism recently, and I've also just I heard about edge effect abundance in the podcast, and I've been trying to visualize how that concept and experience can be applied in the US, because I feel like our geography is naturally so separate and segregated, like with state lines, rural communities, all of that. So I was just wondering, Hunter, if you could speak to our ability to experience edge effect abundance in US communities.
Edge effect abundance, for those of you who don't read Janine Benyus, is the phenomenon in nature that the most abundant ecosystems are where one or more come together, where a river meets the ocean in an estuary, where a meadow meets a forest. And they are abundant because of diversity. So, Tay, in answer to your question, the greater diversity that we can have, the more abundance we will get to enjoy. And that has to do with welcoming immigrants into our communities. It's a study after study after study. If you want high economic development, welcome immigrants. That's what fuels high economic development and abundance. Our state system is almost unique. In a sense, Europe is doing the same thing. It's the United States of Europe, except they haven't merged into a fiscal union as well as a monetary union, and so they're having some real challenges with the euro. But our ability to experiment state by state by state, city by city by city. Remember, it was Jane Jacobs who said, cities are the engines of the economy, not nations. That enables a lot of different experiments. And So what we're doing in Colorado, what they're doing out in California, which is, if it were a separate economy, the world's 5th largest, are very different than what's happening in New England or down south, or let me decline a phone call before it gets in our way, or any of the other parts of the country, and that's good. And I think we ought to celebrate that divergence and see these experiments as the opportunity to try out new things. I was once in Sweden, somewhere up in the north, and a woman had a brilliant program for ecological education. And I said, so you're teaching it? And she said, oh no, I wouldn't do that. It has to go to Stockholm. It has to be approved by the ministry. And then it has to be rolled out across the entire country. It would be unfair of me to be teaching it here and everybody in the country not have that opportunity. I thought, okay, I've just learned something. That's one of the differences about this country. We're entrepreneurial. Somebody gets a wild ass idea, they give it a go and see if it works. And if it works, it can then start to roll out. As opposed to, we have to be a completely homogenous society. So let's keep experimenting. Alexis asked about Rethink X. That's Tony Seba's think tank. So yeah, for those of you who haven't, this may be an even more important paper than John's. Rethinking Humanity by James and Tony. Definitely get this paper, read it, and let me know if you think it's as profound as I do. And Tony and James are saying technological disruption. I mentioned Tony's disruption in energy. Tony says by 2030, the world will be 100% renewable because of fall in the cost of solar, fall in the cost of batteries, the electric car, the driverless car. In Rethinking Humanity, they go on and talk about all of the technological disruptions. Now, I disagree with them somewhat on their saying that it's all going to be cell-cultured protein. But what that could do is wholly disrupt the industrial agriculture that is so much a part of the problem. I think regenerative agriculture is an essential part of the solution. You have to have grazing animals on the ground if you want to take carbon out of the air, put it back in the soil. If you don't have a business model for farmers to do that, they won't. If Tony's right, our food will all be grown in the lab and there won't be farmers. That, I think, would be a real disaster for a whole lot of reasons. But if it does take out the CAFOs, the confined animal feeding operations, the industrial production of corn and soybeans in order to feed cattle and pigs and sheep and chickens and such, the mass slaughter, the way in which we've been doing it, that would be a good thing. And I think what it would do is then enable us, particularly at a local level, to build truly regenerative food production. Myself, I think it'll be tastier that way. But as I said, it's also essential for the climate.
Alexis, do you have a follow-up to that you want to ask?
No, that's amazing. Yeah, because I literally just spoke to Jamie today, so it was quite interesting now speaking to you just to see what the contrast was, especially around there, because I remember you saying in a previous webinar how much you liked eating beef, so wondering what you thought about the protein made, well, the sort of factory made protein. There's one other one actually that's just around this, is that it was the importance of communication, how there's been a lot of stuff currently at the moment around how we're not moving fast enough because people just don't know how to communicate the right things properly. And they were saying, actually, you have all these scientists who keep saying all this stuff, but they just don't know how to communicate it, and actually scaring the living daylights out of people with no solution of how everyone can help is not really the right way of doing it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. When we started writing A Finer Future, I wrote the first chapter, really, no kidding, we're in trouble, and sent it out to some early readers, and they all went, we can't read this. You know, I love you, Hunter. I started into it, and I had to put it down. All right. So I rewrote the first chapter to be, it's 2050, and we made it. And what is life like? Every assertion footnoted. This is happening somewhere in the world already. And it's like William Gibson's quote of the future's already here. It's just not widely distributed yet. And then the second chapter went into, guys, we do have some challenges we have to overcome. And the third was on how did we get into this mess, the neoliberal economics that came from Milton Friedman et al., holding that humans are greedy bastards, but that's okay because the market is perfect. And in a perfect market, you against me will somehow aggregate to the greater good for all. No, it won't. It hasn't. And it actually turns out that's bad science. We now know from evolutionary biology, from the DNA, from archaeology, that back when there were pre-humans, there weren't even humans yet, the pre-humans almost went extinct. There were apparently many tribes of them. Most of them went extinct. We were down to as few numbers as the now endangered mountain gorillas. Those who made it, that band in Southern Africa that made it, cared for unnecessary people, old toothless men, and we know this from a skeleton that's been found, cripples. If you're in it only for yourself, you're not going to take care of cripples and old men. They're dispensable, get rid of them. They took care of them. And that was the tribe that survived. And the evolutionary biologists say humans have a drive to acquire. And once we acquire, a drive to defend. That much the neolibs got right. But they say that's only half of who it is to be human. We also have a drive to bond, to care. And we have a drive to communicate, to create meaning. This is the thesis of Yuval Harari in the book Sapiens, that our big brain came from telling stories, communicating. And say the scientists like Dr. Paul Lawrence at Harvard, if you take people away from that drive to bond, they cease to be human. It is the harshest punishment, solitary confinement. We need to be together and we need to care. And that caring is not a bug. It's what makes you human. So on the basis of this, people like Dr. Michael Pearson at Fordham are building a whole new approach to business called humanistic management, arguing against the economistic approach of we're only in it for the money. Greed is the only driving feature. And they're saying that's just bad science. The science is that we're in it because we care.
Amazing.
I know that's why I'm in it. Before I ask Lorena to ask her excellent question around regenerative as a term, I want to ask each of you, the typical format of these Q&As is that there's about 10 minutes that's set aside to go off into separate rooms to talk amongst yourselves. And this is such a nice sized group that I wasn't sure whether that was something that you all would want or not. So what I'd like each of you to do while Lorena's asking her question is just write in the chat yes or no, yes being you would like the opportunity to break off into different groups, or no, you don't think that that is something you'd like to do. And Lorena, would you go ahead, please?
Sure, thank you. So my question is mainly, as we've seen in the past few years, how the words wellness, sustainability, they all became super, super famous around, sorry. And But then I saw so many companies jumping into this opportunity because the words were hot and they were new and they were popular. And now you have all these companies talking about wellness, and you see the products that they're selling and it's still trash. So the question is, do we have to be careful now that regenerative, it's a word that's becoming popular? Because I've been reading a lot about it from different companies and people doing it, and it seems that many of them are so different from each other, and then there's confusion on who's doing it the right way. And do we have to be careful when we
Yes,
look into regenerative?
absolutely. And it's one of the reasons I continue to stress Fullerton's 8 principles. Regenerative is not synonymous with sustainable or sustainability. It's not synonymous with well-being. It comes from a disciplined look at what it will take to be truly regenerative. What Fullerton did was he was 18 years at JP Morgan. 2001, he quit. He said, there's something rotten. Walked away and started reading. He read for 6 years. His wife said he was clinically depressed. He said, I may have been. And then he started writing and working with a lot of other thinkers, and came out with these principles drawn from how natural systems operate. And a lot of this stuff drawn from Buckminster Fuller, who to my knowledge was the first to use the term regenerative in this context. And Bucky was using it, of course, back in the 30s. And what John has tried to do is to put some defined boundaries around what do you mean when you say regenerative. And so I think it's important that all of us in this conversation do that in our own minds, decide, do we agree with how John has defined it, or do we want to define it somewhat differently, but that we evolve to a shared understanding of what it is and what it isn't. So yeah, I think the language matters a lot.
I've been very concerned about it because I know, having been involved in a certification program, if there isn't a legal definition, people use words whatever way they want. And it's always been a concern to me, especially with a word like regenerative, which is such an incredible word. There isn't really another word like it in the lexicon. So, Hunter, I want to ask you, what haven't we asked you that we should be asking you?
Oh gosh, a lot. What can each one of us do? Which I think is ultimately the key question. And short answer, ensure that everyone votes. Join a group like Move On or Indivisible or your preferred flavor of group that is getting out the vote. Ensure that the procedures of voting are retained. I think that's now in hand. We need to keep an eye on it. But write to people you know in the swing states. Write to people you don't know. You can do this by joining Move On or joining Indivisible. They will send you names of likely voters who may not have voted the last time around. Talk particularly to the young people in your lives who are of age to vote, and make damn sure they vote. Be available to drive people to the polls if needed. And let's win this one. This time around, it really goddamn matters. Pray for the longevity of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And then look in your own community. What needs to be done? So I sat up till fairly late last night on a call with Woody Tash and a group of people who are part of a little organization here in the Boulder Valley called SOIL, Slow Opportunities for Investing Locally. And what we do, we pool a little bit of money. You put in at least $250 a year. Some people put in a lot more. They gathered a couple $100,000, and each month they loan it out at zero interest to local farmers, ranchers, to begin building the food system here in the Boulder Valley. Woody has a new book out called Aha. If you go to Slow Money, it's for free. He's downloading it in episodes, and you can get it off the Slow Money site. But look at what you care about in your community and become actively involved with it. There is so much you can do, from the safety of your Zoom screen, of talking to other people, of raising these issues, of engendering this conversation in the community. Get a dot. Do one thing every day. What's your dot? Do one thing.
Claire asked a fantastic question. Claire?
Sorry, the sun beaming in is just enough that I can't even see my control. Yeah, as I said, I'm not really sure, and I don't want to take us too far afield, but Hunter, I've been participating in a program that's co-sponsored by Spirit Rock down the road, called White and Awakening Together, and we're in deep in the literature and the history of racism, its origin, not just here in the States, but in the world. And so you said early on, humankind and how attitudes and institutionalization of the things that just reinforce the dominance of white supremacy, those attitudes and systems also reflect attitudes toward the environment. And that's interesting to me. I'd never heard that linkage. And so my question is there literature to that effect? Because I think if that could get more visibility, wow, the power behind the two things to pull us together to do what's right for humanity and the environment would really be it just so much force. Now is the time, I guess, I'm thinking.
Now is the time. It's a very good question. There's a growing literature on all of this stuff, and let me pull up a little of it. There's a great series in the New York Times. I believe it's called the 1619 Project. And it is the arrival of slaves on this continent and then how the country was built by them. Here is a piece on the structural racism in our food system. These are articles that I have pulled together for my students tomorrow. This is a piece by We Mean Business, which is a climate solutions coalition, business coalition, on the relationship between racism and climate change. Eek. Okay, I don't.
Thank you, Hunter. I don't want to distract you too much from other good questions that may be coming about, but this literature that you're forwarding will be hugely valuable. I'll definitely give it visibility in the discussions with what is like 330 people.
Wow.
Partaking in this discussion. Yeah, it's an 8-week series.
It's always good when you get the Buddhists involved.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
So we are coming to the end of the hour soon, and I want to ask, are there any other questions for Hunter? And if there are, you can just speak up. You don't even have to put it in the chat box. Okay. Well, wow. It's always great to talk to Hunter. And I'm just delighted that all of you beautiful people joined us today for this conversation. I want to ask Elaine, do you have anything that you'd like to say before we sign off?
Well, first, I want to thank both you and Hunter for spending time with us, for doing the podcast together. And again, I will encourage, if you all haven't had a chance to listen to that podcast, please do. It is very meaty. Hunter is such a wealth of information. It's kind of hard to fathom what it's like inside of her mind, but it is a busy place and she captures and retains so much. So Hunter, I just want to honor you for the deep devotion that you have gifted all of us with in your life, and you continue to, and I value you so much. And I thank you for sharing time with us this morning. And I know we'll look forward to doing this again. And maybe we'll regroup in 2021 and do some reflection on what we witness over the next several months, because let's hope we're going to be having a lot of champagne and other clicking of glasses to do together come November. Well, I don't think it'll be the 3rd based on all the noise. So maybe, I don't know, the 8th or so. But I want to also just give one other acknowledgement to Elizabeth, because she's a dear friend, and as she mentioned in the beginning, she serves on our advisory board, and I'm so grateful to you for your extraordinary presence in this process and the incredible way that you have really invested in making this conversation with Hunter so rich and broad and deep. So I thank you so much for that. Tay, thank you as always for being such a wonderful mistress behind the scenes, helping us keep all the parts moving and flowing. I deeply appreciate you for many things, and that is one of them. And at the Epicenter, I'm excited to share, we're rebranding ourselves. We're going to be called Regenerative Rising, and we're very excited about helping hold the integrity of what regenerative means through our efforts as we work with many other organizations, including Natural Capitalism Solutions, to make sure that we're all lifting up a clear and deeply resonant understanding that this is a principle-based system. It is not a list of things to do. It is a deep way of being. It is a living systems perspective. And with that comes a much richer way of engaging, and you know, I wouldn't even call it problem solving. It's seeing what's potentialized and helping birth that. So for our efforts with our work coming forward, Women Leading Regeneration on the Land, which is going to be led by another dear friend and colleague, Daniela Ibarra-Howell with Savory Institute. That will be on October 1st, 12 to 3 p.m. Mountain Time. And it will have some panel discussion and also a lot of opportunity for interaction between all who participate. And then we're excited to try our hand at our Regenerative Earth Summit, which has been an in-person event since 2017. And we will be producing that online on October 29th and 30th. And this will be more of a workshop structure, more intended towards outcomes and how we strategize and work more cooperatively across a lot of different disciplines to really start to anchor activities on the planet that really help further this vision of healing the world and doing it in a healed state to each other, because that is fundamental. That is on the October 29th and 30th. As I mentioned, that will be, I think, from 10 to 2. And In Rhythm and Trey Cates are going to help lead that effort with our team here at Regenerative Rising. And then on November 18th, and we'll be sending out emails, so you'll get all this, but I just kind of want to give you a flow of what's coming up in the future, so you can kind of hold spaces for more Zoom time. Women Leading Regeneration in the Wardrobe will be on November 18th. It's really important that, you know, what we eat, what we wear, what we're bringing into, you know, the power that we are using, all have, there's our choices that we can make that help restore the health of ecosystems and treat people better. And so our women leading regeneration in the wardrobe is going to take a look at that. And again, Daniela Ibarra-Howell and Savory Institute will be helping lead that program. They do a lot of work with their land to market program, working with companies like Eileen Fisher and Timberland and others who are stepping up and making a very deep investment in creating regenerative products that are truly doing land healing and recovery. And then finally, on December 1st and 2nd, we will do a second Regenerative Earth Summit, the continuation of the workshop process to continue the work, and we'll be looking to do that on into 2021. We are also part of a consolidation or collaboration, I should say, of a lot of different nonprofit organizations that are working together to build an online platform that will allow the regenerative community to have a lot more transparency with each other and cooperation. And that's going to be hosted on hilo.com. At the Epicenter / Regenerative Rising will be helping steward that community, and part of the working groups that we are helping structure through the Regenerative Earth Summit will continue inside of that community platform. Again, all of this will continue to be coming through our shared newsletters, and you'll see this with a lot of other organizations in the community as well. Tay, did I forget anything else that's important in the coming weeks and months?
No, you covered it all. I would say just keep tuning into the Regenerative Voices podcast as well, because we have some exciting guests coming up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have some awesome guest hosts doing the Regenerative Voices program as well. And as I've mentioned, we have a lot of partners for programming coming up. So I just, again, thank you, Hunter, and thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you to all of you for spending an hour of your day with us today for our Women Leading Regeneration Power Hour. Take good care of yourselves, and yes, vote, vote, vote. Make sure others vote. I agree with Hunter, 100%. That is our job for the next 71 days, is to make sure that we have new leadership in the Senate, expanded leadership in the House, and absolutely some redecorating in the White House. All right, folks, take good care.
Bye, everybody.
Adios all.